Nobody thought things would ever reach this point, and that's exactly what makes this situation so shocking. What people are seeing now, the headlines, the chaos, the hospital reports, it all feels sudden on the surface. But in reality, this wasn't something that just happened overnight. This was a situation that had been quietly building in the background for a long time, slowly gaining tension without most people even realizing it. And now that everything has finally exploded into the public eye, it's forcing everyone to go back and look at every detail they might have ignored before. At the center of all of this is Offset, a global artist with a massive reputation, and someone who isn't new to controversy. But even for him, this situation feels different. Because this isn't just about music or social media drama or even ego anymore. This has crossed into something much more serious, something that has real-world consequences. And when news broke that he had been shot at a casino in Florida, it immediately changed the tone of everything. What once looked like entertainment suddenly became something people were genuinely concerned about. And then there's Cardi B, who has been closely connected to everything happening behind the scenes. While she hasn't been front and center in every moment of this situation, her presence is impossible to ignore. Reports suggest that she's been extremely upset about how things unfolded, especially knowing that this situation didn't come out of nowhere. Because from her perspective, and from what people are starting to piece together, there were warning signs long before things got to this point. Signs that something bigger was brewing. Something that could eventually spiral out of control if it wasn't handled properly. What makes this even more intense is the fact that the public is only now starting to understand how deep this situation actually goes. At first, it looked like another typical back and forth between artists, something fans see all the time. But now, with everything that's happened, people are starting to realize that this wasn't just talk. There were real emotions involved, real tension, and possibly real intentions that went far beyond what anyone initially thought. And that realization is what's making this situation feel so much heavier than a normal rap controversy. When people first noticed tension between Offset and Lil Tjay, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. In the world of hip-hop, disagreements, competition, and even public arguments are part of the culture. Fans are used to seeing artists go back and forth, sometimes for attention, sometimes for real personal reasons. So when the first signs of friction appeared, most people didn't think much of it. It looked like the kind of situation that would eventually fade away or get resolved behind the scenes. But this time, it didn't go that way. Instead of staying small, the situation slowly started gaining attention, especially when it moved from vague tension to direct accusations. That's when things began to shift. Because once personal issues get brought into the public space, especially involving money, everything becomes more serious. And that's exactly what happened when Lil Tjay went public with his claims. He didn't just hint at a problem, he directly accused Offset of owing him money, around $10,000, allegedly tied to gambling. Now, on the surface, that number might not seem huge compared to the kind of money people assume celebrities have. But in situations like this, it's never just about the amount. It's about what it represents. Respect, reputation, and credibility all become part of the conversation the moment something like that is exposed publicly. What made things even more intense was the way these accusations were delivered. This wasn't a calm discussion or a quiet disagreement. It was loud, public, and direct. And once that kind of energy is introduced into a situation, it becomes very difficult to control what happens next. Because now, both sides feel pressure. Pressure to respond, pressure to defend themselves, and pressure to not look weak in front of an audience that's watching everything unfold in real time. And that's the moment when this situation stopped being just another minor conflict. Because once money, pride, and public perception all get involved at the same time, things tend to escalate quickly. And in this case, that escalation was only just beginning. As the situation continued to develop, it became clear that this wasn't going to stay at the level of simple accusations. What started as a claim about money quickly turned into something much more personal, and that shift is what really changed the direction of everything. Because once things become personal, emotions take over, and logic often takes a back seat. Lil Tjay didn't just stick to the original claim. Instead, he started adding more details, more stories, and more statements that painted Offset in a negative light. He talked about situations where Offset allegedly didn't have money, described moments where he was asking others for help, and suggested that there were deeper issues behind the scenes, including possible gambling problems. Whether all of these claims were true or not almost became irrelevant at that point, because the damage was already being done in the public eye. For Offset, this wasn't just about defending himself anymore. It was about protecting his image, his reputation, and his position. In the world he operates in, perception matters just as much as reality, sometimes even more. And being publicly labeled as someone who owes money or is struggling financially can have a serious impact on how people view you. So, naturally, he wasn't going to let those claims go unanswered. At the same time, the way this situation was unfolding made it almost impossible to de-escalate. Every new statement added fuel to the fire. Every post, every response, every reaction from fans pushed things further. And because everything was happening so publicly, there was no real opportunity for either side to step back without it being seen as a loss. What makes this stage of the situation so important is that this is where the tone was permanently changed. Before this, it could have still been resolved quietly. But once personal attacks, public exposure, and reputation damage entered the picture, the chances of a peaceful resolution became much smaller. And from that point on, everything that followed felt almost inevitable, like the situation was heading towards something bigger, something more serious, whether anyone wanted it to or not. As tensions kept rising, there came a point where everything shifted from being intense to being dangerous. This was no longer just about arguments, accusations, or even reputation. This was the moment where words started turning into something that carried real weight and real consequences. Because when threats enter the picture, everything changes instantly. The situation reached that level when messages between the two sides began to surface. These weren't just casual exchanges or minor disagreements. The tone had clearly escalated. At one point, there were statements suggesting physical confrontation, including threats that went far beyond what most people would consider normal in any kind of dispute. And once those kinds of words are said, especially publicly or semi-publicly, it becomes very difficult to take them back. What makes this moment so critical is not just what was said, but what it represented. Because when someone goes from arguing to threatening, it shows that emotions have reached a level where control is starting to slip. And when both sides are responding with that same level of intensity, it creates a situation where anything can happen. There's no longer a clear boundary, no clear limit, and no guarantee that things will stay verbal. For the audience watching all of this unfold, this was the point where things started to feel uncomfortable. What once looked like entertainment now felt unpredictable. People began to question whether this could go further, whether something real could happen as a result of everything being said. And unfortunately, those concerns weren't unfounded. Because once a situation reaches this level, it doesn't take much for it to spiral. A single moment, a single encounter, or even a misunderstanding can be enough to push things over the edge. And looking back now, this moment feels like the turning point. The exact point where everything stopped being controlled and started moving towards something much more serious. After all the back and forth, the accusations, and the threats, something unexpected happened. Everything went quiet. And that silence was almost more unsettling than the chaos that came before it. Because in situations like this, silence doesn't always mean resolution. Sometimes it means something is building behind the scenes, away from the public eye, where people can't see what's really happening. For a moment, it looked like both sides had stepped back. No more posts, no more direct shots, no more viral clips spreading across social media. Fans started to assume that maybe the situation had cooled off, or at the very least, that it wasn't going to escalate any further. But in reality, that calm surface was hiding something much deeper. Because when tensions reach a certain level, they don't just disappear. They sit there, unresolved, waiting for the right moment to resurface. What makes this phase so important is how deceptive it was. From the outside, it gave the impression that things were under control again. But behind the scenes, there were still unresolved issues, still emotions that hadn't been addressed, and still a level of tension that hadn't gone away. And when situations like that are left unresolved, they tend to come back even stronger than before. There were also subtle signs that things weren't truly over. Small hints, moments that didn't get as much attention at the time, but in hindsight, feel much more significant. People started noticing patterns, locations, movements, interactions, things that suggested that both sides were still very aware of each other. And in an environment where reputation, pride, and pressure all play a role, that awareness can be dangerous. Because all it takes is one moment, one unexpected encounter, one situation where both sides are in the same place at the same time. And when that happens, everything that was left unresolved can come rushing back all at once. Looking back now, that silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like the setup, the moment, right before everything finally collapsed. And that's exactly what makes what happened next feel less like a surprise and more like something that was always going to happen eventually. Then suddenly, without warning, everything shifted. What had been building quietly for so long finally exploded into something real, something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as just another online situation. News started spreading rapidly, and within moments, it was everywhere. Offset had been shot at a casino in Florida, and just like that, the entire narrative changed. At first, there was confusion. People didn't know what to believe. Information was coming in from different directions, some of it unclear, some of it conflicting. But one thing was certain. This was serious. This wasn't social media anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was real life with real consequences. And as more details started to come out, the situation only became more intense. Videos from the scene began circulating online, showing moments of chaos and confusion. People moving around quickly, police presence increasing. The kind of environment that immediately signals that something has gone very wrong. Witnesses described a fight breaking out before everything escalated, and that detail alone changed how people started to interpret the situation. Because now it wasn't just about the shooting itself. It was about everything that led up to it. Offset was rushed to the hospital, and while reports confirmed that his injuries were not life-threatening, that didn't make the situation any less serious. The fact that things had reached this point at all was enough to shake everyone watching from the outside. Because once something like this happens, there's no going back to what it was before. The situation has crossed a line that can't be undone, and almost immediately people started connecting the dots. The previous arguments, the threats, the tension, everything that had been building suddenly felt relevant again. What once seemed like separate moments now looked like pieces of a much larger story, one that had been heading toward this exact outcome. Then came the reports about involvement. Names started being mentioned, including Lil Tjay, who was later taken into custody in connection with the incident. While he wasn't directly charged with the shooting, his presence alone was enough to raise serious questions. Witness accounts suggested that this wasn't random, that there was a confrontation, and that things escalated from there. And that's what makes this moment so significant, because it transformed the entire situation from speculation into reality. Everything that people had been watching from a distance suddenly became something much more serious, something that forced everyone to reconsider what they had seen leading up to it. Looking back, this wasn't just an incident. It was the result of everything that came before it. The tension, the pride, the unresolved conflict. And now, with everything out in the open, the only question left is how far this situation will go from here.